And Mark, I think it is, first of all, it's a dramatically different feeling than a year ago. Remember last year, Florida State was, there weren't great expectations for Florida State. I think from an LSU perspective, people around this program and fans certainly were very confident a year ago. The game was in New Orleans. Florida State had fallen on hard times. And LSU's back-to-back 500 seasons, I think, were largely ignored here. And, losing that game the way they did was kind of a pretty stark reminder of how far LSU had to go. So the fact that both teams went on to have 10-win seasons, won their bowl games in Orlando, and now enter this season top 10, there's a lot of nervous energy here this week, Mark. It's a sharp contrast from a year ago where there was a ton of confidence. Now it's hey, if you're really going to be a national championship contender, you got to win this game, because if you don't, you've left yourself no margin for error. We know there's never been a 2-loss team make the playoff.
It's difficult, Matt, for me to separate these two teams, even starting by the two quarterbacks. They're similar in so many ways, and then filtering through wide receiver cores and everything. It's difficult to separate these teams. I do think that LSU's offensive line and all the growth that those young pups experienced throughout last season is major in them controlling the line of scrimmage, obviously, and then allowing the playmakers to do what they do.
Yeah, I think if you go 1 to 85, LSU is a more talented team. Like if you look at star ratings and then, draft prospects, stuff like that. Now that's obviously with tremendous amount of respect for guys like Jared Verse and Keon Coleman. And obviously Jordan Travis, now a 6th-year senior. But 1 to 85, LSU is probably a more talented team, but Florida State has a ton of experience. They return more production than any team in college football. So there's a little bit of that. But I do like what you said there, Mark. And the biggest question, Brian Kelly kind of reminded us of this earlier this week. LSU, at this point a year ago, going into that Florida State game, that game week, they hadn't even settled their starting 5 on the offensive line. They didn't know Monday of game week who their 5 offensive linemen were going to be. Now, you look at the year Will Campbell and Emory Jones had, you have legit bookend tackles that are NFL prospects. You've got a starting 5 on the offensive line and a 2 deep that have all played a ton of ball now. So, Mark, I think LSU's offense this year is going to be really good. They have got shocker. LSU's got really good receivers. Right? They've always had really good receivers, but they got 8 scholarship running backs. They're 2 deep on the offensive line at every position. They got a fifth-year quarterback that started every game of his college career. This offense should be really good. And it's, Florida State's going to have a tough time handling this offense, but I think every defense is going to have a tough time with this offense. The big question for LSU, Mark, is going to be the other side of the ball.
Matt, we saw 2 much lower end teams in Minnesota and Nebraska, but very evenly matched, play a sloppy game. And I think in the end, there was a difference between PJ Fleck's 7th season, Matt Rule first game. 1 year ago, Brian Kelly, for as good as he is, first game. Do you think that makes a major difference that it's a full season under his leadership now?
Yes. Just to illustrate that a little bit, when Brian Kelly was hired, one of the first things he did is he implemented this daily accountability exam, for lack of a better word, where every player had to fill out this accountability form. How much did you sleep? What did you eat? Did you work out? All these different things. And that was a standard expectation in his program. Well, a year ago, he was having to remind everybody and teach them all what the expectations were. Now it's second nature. So yes, I think that is an absolute fair point, that there's just a lot more comfort. Jaden Daniels said this week he feels 20 times better and more comfortable than he did a year ago. Now, I don't think you can get 20 times the production. If you did, that would dust even Joe Burrow's season, which that's not going to happen. But yes, that comfort level, knowing what the expectations are. And honestly, Mark, this team, the team a year ago, in many respects, they were building the bridge as they crossed it. They were learning. Keep in mind, Harold Perkins didn't even play against Florida State. He had 1 tackle, I think it was on special teams. He hadn't even figured in to the defense yet. Now he's, ESPN put out their list of the top 100 players in college football. He's number 4 on the list. Guy wasn't even playing at this point. So, yes, they know their personnel. The personnel knows the coaches, the expectations. It's a dramatically different feel than it was a year ago.
Matt, you mentioned the defensive concerns. No Mason Smith, maybe the most talented of that entire group, but certainly behind Harold Perkins as a playmaker, but certainly so much expected of him. But on the back end, not up to LSU standards still.
Right, and that's the real question. So, Mason Smith, I'm sure you've talked about it on your channel, Mark. The whole thing is just, in the NIL era, the fact that we're suspending a kid for getting paid for autographs, like 3 weeks before NIL went live, is weird. But listen, they don't have another Mason Smith, right? There is no, the sum of the parts is not as great as the whole. Yeah, you don't have another one of them. But what LSU did in the transfer portal this year was they went and signed 4 dudes who have played major college football, defensive tackle, and have all played a ton of ball. So they've got a really good rotation. And Mekhi Wingo had an All-America year a season ago. So their front 7, I think, is going to be dramatically improved, even from a unit that was pretty good a year ago. But you mentioned the secondary, and you're right. When Ed Ogeron got fired and there was this mass exodus out of the program and everything that was happening therein, the secondary was probably the spot that was hit hardest. And so Brian Kelly, just to be competitive last year, had to go get a bunch of transfers. And he did, and they played pretty well. And they finished 32nd in the country in pass defense. Well, you only return 1 scholarship defensive back, 1 scholarship cornerback from a year ago. It's LaTerrence Welch, who's running second right now. So they had to go do the same thing all over again, go recruit a whole bunch of transfers. And we're going to see how they play. Mark, Zy Alexander was an FCS All-American. He's the best guy they got. He looks pretty good, but we'll see it in a game, right? Deuce Chestnut was all ACC at Syracuse. It's been a little bit of a challenge getting him to transition to this level and this caliber of play. J.K. Johnson is a transfer they brought in from Ohio State. He's got a broken leg. Everybody remembers Denver Harris. He was a 5-star when he signed with Texas A&M. He's running on the 3rd team right now. So that cornerback position is going to be one to watch. And honestly, Mark, I think that LSU's defensive front is going to have to supplement that defensive back. They are going to have to generate pressure and make for tough throws and rush decisions to try to alleviate some of the pressure on that secondary while they try to figure out who's going to fit in where.
The easiest way to find Matt, I think, is just to follow him on Twitter, and you see it, Matt Moscona, right there. And I've said this before, the content and the conversation with Matt is always going to be some combination of fun, funny, insightful, thoughtful, may bring you to tears at times. Any of that or all of that at any time, it is worth it. So get there, follow Matt. Matt, we know you're running around at 100 miles an hour. We appreciate you stopping by.
Always my pleasure, Mark. Looking forward to visiting again as the season goes along.